Hey everyone, I'll tell you that OpenAI sure does get around, huh? You're watching Techstrong, gang. Hi everyone, happy Thursday and welcome to our Thursday edition of Techstrong, gang. I'm Alan Schimmel and it's great to have you on here. As usual, we got some interesting topics to explore with some very interesting people to explore them with. Let me introduce you to our interesting people today. Uh, our gang for today is Jeff Reich of the IDSA. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you.
Our DevOps extraordinaire, Ambassador Garima Bhopal. Garima, good to see you. Joining us, I think, for the second day in a row, hailing from Hudson, Ohio, Stephen Foskett. Stephen, it's good to have you back on today, as always.
And I would come in every day if I could, but
you don't threaten me.
I shouldn't say that,
Stephen. Don't threaten me. We'd love to have you. And of course, speaking of being on every day, he is our everyday Chief Content Officer and gang host here with us, Mike Vizard. Gang members, welcome. It's great to have you on here. So Mike, as I teased in the opening, boy, this OpenAI is gaining some reputation for getting around, huh?
Well, so the deal here is $38 billion partnership with AWS, and I guess OpenAI continues to need as much compute infrastructure as it could, but I feel like, this is the latest in a long series of these announcements, and they seem to have an insatiable appetite for compute. So now, and I don't mean to be overly snarky, but Alan, I'm kind of like, well, who doesn't have an OpenAI contract these days? And if you don't, what does that say about you?
I agree with you. So I've got two things I want. I spent a lot of time as a biz dev, corp dev person, chief strategy officer, but it was biz dev and corp dev. We used to do back in the day what we used to call a lot of Barney deals, right? Everybody remembers Barney, your favorite purple dinosaur.
That's what the Barney thing's about.
Yeah, right. I mean, we would do a press release. I love you, you love me. We're a big happy family, and all said and good, but not a lot came out of it. I'm beginning to get that Barney feeling with some of these OpenAI deals because, quite frankly, as much money as they're able to raise, and I've heard, they were an open source, but they changed their kind of corporate structure now, and they are preparing for an IPO. Perhaps they can do a for-profit thing. And the IPO may value the company at upwards of $1 trillion, they said. But that's speculation. When you look at the amount of money they've pledged on these compute deals, right? It far exceeds their ability to pay as of today. Now, in a lot of these deals, they pledge, we're going to use you for compute this way for X dollars, and then you're going to pledge X plus dollars back to us for using our services. So it becomes a net zero, deal. And maybe that's the key to it. I don't know. I applaud them. It must be great to work in the biz dev strategic relationship department there because maybe second only to NVIDIA. But I applaud them for going out and making all these deals. I just question whether they can actually be done. And from AWS's point of view, again, kudos to them. Look, they've got a nice stake in Anthropic. But Google has a nice stake too, and Anthropic just did a deal with Google. AWS hedging their bets here, bringing OpenAI into it. And of course, OpenAI has that whole Oracle relationship as well. You need a scorecard here. These are like These are like high school students pre-AIDS. The way they're swapping around here, like free love, brother. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I will pitch in, and then maybe I'll let Stephen and Jeff talk about other regulatory pressure and the risks which they foresee. But let's start from the basics. $38 billion deal with Amazon and OpenAI. I happened to be at a dinner table with a few folks from AWS, and we were pretty excited to see the momentum, because particularly because of the multi-cloud approach which is in making here. But of course, digging into details about this multi-year agreement which enables OpenAI to access hundreds and thousands of high performance NVIDIA GPUs and tens of millions of CPUs hosted on AWS cloud platform. What it means to the ecosystem is primarily for the US tech hub ecosystem. I think most of the investment probably will foresee in some specific hubs, and this is again, how much geographical distribution or widening regional economic disparity happens through this is we have to watch out for that. The massive scaling opportunity which OpenAI would get from this, again, the scale of compute and the CPUs which are in the promise and is in making. It's also like ensuring that we have next generation AI models, and also ensuring performance enhancements and reach to a certain extent. Multi-cloud AI ecosystem, I mentioned that. Operational advantages specific to AWS customers, because I, of course, people who are already riding the AWS wave will could benefit out of this. And validating that, I think AWS was lagging behind a little bit in the AI ecosystem. So with this, they are solidifying their position. But there are more cons to this, and again, like pros are very obvious, but cons, I think we'll have to call out cons as well. I feel that there will be a certain amount of competitive tensions between the cloud providers, AWS, Microsoft, in particular. How complicated this relationship can become, we will see in the next few months. Ongoing regulatory scrutiny on the big tech partnerships, and I'll call out some of the recent past examples which are very evident for everyone to notice. I mean, Google, and the Google search monopoly is no new news to anyone here. So that is something which properly also signifies that how like big tech regulatory scrutiny is kind of speeding up. But again, could we act in time with these kind of mega big deals happening, and we don't act within a certain time frame, and then we have gone past that stage. For example, what happens with Facebook, Instagram, all these kind of platform merging into a single platform. I have to say that EU has done a great job, because EU regulatory and scrutiny has significant presence. And when this acquisition of Adobe and Figma was supposed to happen, I think they had a substantial regulatory pressure and they scrutinized it. Similarly, I think I can give you some examples of acquisitions which happened in Canadian telecom ecosystem, which was also scrutinized to a certain extent. Why I'm advocating and I'm bringing these examples is that, this big tech advantage, right? I mean, as you, Ellen, mentioned, this multi year agreements, I mean, it's not substantiated how and how it is supposed to be rolled out, of course, which regions will be benefiting out of it and all that. But to a certain extent, it also shows that, we have policy making and regulatory gaps, and we have to scrutinize these mega deals in a more sensitive way, so that we don't provide uh, uh, like disadvantage from a small medium business enterprise perspective. But I mean, I'll stop here. I'll probably take support from Jeff and Stefan for their views as well.
Well, Stephen, let me ask you this question to Garima's point and maybe come to the heart of the matter. If OpenAI and all those big hyperscalers are basically sucking up all the GPU capacity, do I have any hope of getting access to GPUs, or are we basically locking up the distribution of the GPUs, and that's going to become an issue?
Well, I think Garima is 100% accurate in her assessment here. This is all about locking up and monopolizing this market. And in fact, I would say that this whole announcement with OpenAI and AWS, remember the Stargate announcement with Oracle as well, and the fact that they've already been using Microsoft Azure as their primary hardware. This is a financial engineering move and a market dominating move more than anything else. It's all about them essentially staking not just a claim, but staking control of all of the GPU resources out there. Um, Ultimately, though, the question isn't will OpenAI dominate the GPU hardware resources, the next gen resources in the coming year. The answer is yes, both through a combination of finance, or financial engineering, as well as engineering, and of course partner work. Um, but what will the result of that be? And I think maybe that goes to your point, Mike. That okay, OpenAI ends up with essentially a monopoly on global GPU resources and $1 trillion of fantastic IPO money. Then what? I personally believe that the era of ever embiggening models is at an end. And I think it's time for companies to focus on actually useful applications of AI, productive applications that generate revenue and deliver business results, instead of continually trying to slurp up more data, build bigger supercomputer size, not even supercomputer, data center, multi-data center supercomputers to build an even bigger model. I don't think it's going to get to artificial general intelligence with the current transformer technology that we have. And so I feel that this is entirely pointless. And ultimately, what's going to happen is we're going to see practical applications that use smaller models, more distilled models that can run on much smaller hardware. And the whole, supersize me approach that OpenAI is taking is, I think, a dead end.
Alan, you're a biz dev guy, and I always want to know like these kind of things. But where did this $38 billion number come from exactly? Did somebody stick their finger out the window and basically, magically decide what the cost of
Well,
G?
it is probably tied into a certain amount of rack space compute, and it very well may be tied into what OpenAI is getting back from AWS as well. But guys, let me be clear here. First of all, when I used to help my friend Brad Feld in the VC world. And one of the things they look at when you send in your pitch to a VC, they don't just say no automatically in spite of what you may think. They actually do look at it. Things they look at: size of market. Is this a big enough playground? Right? Another thing they look at: do you have any proprietary technology? Well, this is before open source was such a big thing. But do you have any proprietary technology? A third thing they look at, though: barrier to entry. And to me, that is the biggest thing I see in this AI revolution, where in the let's say .com era, the .com revolution, everybody in the garage who could do a PowerPoint slide could be the next Alta Vista or the next Netscape, or that's what Google was, right? And so it was an everyman revolution. Here in the AI era, it's the big boys who are putting up barriers to entry that are just now. I don't think our normal monopoly, antitrust measures figure in here, because this isn't about mergers and acquisitions. This reminds me more, and forgive me, I'm going to date myself, but the Hunt brothers tried to corral this world silver market, right? And they came very close. It was kind of out of that movie only in America where the Dukes tried to get the orange juice futures market, right? The Hunt brothers in real life nearly cornered the worldwide silver market one time. And as a result, there were all kinds of regulations that got put into place so that doesn't happen again. But it's the same thing here. You've got, in essence, these 7 or 8 companies, and we don't need to name them all, but we know who they are, right? That are, represent 80% of the growth of the S&P 500, that are really locking up, cornering the GPU market and the compute market. And Stephen, to your point, I take a page out of Jurassic Park, right? Nature will find a way.
Alan, I think nature will find a way. And I think there's another analogy to look at. There's a lot of analogies we could use. I believe this is a nuclear arms race in AI, in that the superpowers are going to, take a look at the current nuclear situation here. The world has enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world at least 80 times over, right? I believe that's a situation we have here. And the big superpowers are going to get even more simply as a deterrent, whether that's a valid word here or not. But I think that's what's going to happen. And to Garima's point, in other jurisdictions, it could be more effective, but I don't think you could point any example to me where a US regulation got in front of a problem, ever. So, I don't think that's gonna happen here. And the last one I'll use, 'cause I live in the world of analogies, is I believe the AI bubble, which we're in, prove me wrong, please, has a lot of hot air balloons, and OpenAI is the biggest hot air balloon, and everyone wants to grab onto the hot air balloon as it goes up. If enough people join, it's gonna come down. I'm not saying OpenAI is gonna crash and it's gonna go away, but, there's no way this can be sustained financially or technology.
I think this will also invite some risk management into AI, which is a good news because, you know, people are also overseeing this. Like strategic leadership is overseeing this. That this can like this can be seen as soft acquisition. Come on, we already know that these kind of mega deals, it's also how to go around the policymakers and regulatories to kind of ensure that they don't come in their way. But uh, I can see that there will be a lot of risk management associated with a like onboarding to cloud as well as using open AI models. I mean, again, for all sort of goodness what they have done to the market, they are still training their models from open source, open data, right? And uh, you know, trust me or not, I think this will also bite back.
Mhm. It might be time to reissue that classic book, What Color is Your Parachute? Because when that bubble pops, man, you got to figure out what you're going to do.
Well, if I can add one more thing into this conversation, just this morning as we're taping this, the news came out that the hedge fund investor who inspired the film The Big Short has just put $1 billion short against NVIDIA and Palantir, betting that the AI bubble is going to burst. We're not a financial podcast. I'm not a good source of financial news, but I'm looking at that thinking, boy, I wonder if that guy knows something.
Maybe.
Let me reinforce, though, we're not giving you any investment advice. We have enough problems just talking about the technology. But it is.
But there is research being done that, and it's years away from any fruition and it may never happen, but it's basically arguing that the entire uh, model, the way we build them, is based on Fortran and all those core technologies. And there's another way of thinking about this that's going to be a little more reliable and a little more declarative, using a different set of math algorithms and models. So people are doing research in this space. So, you know, the current AI models may not be the end all be all here, but I think that's where we are for the next 5 years at least.
No, so here's where it is. And it goes back to what I said about Jurassic Park and nature finding a way, right? Right now, what we have is what I call Cadillac AI. But we may not need a Cadillac for every use of AI. We may need a Chevy and a Ford and a Pontiac, for those who remember those great Pontiac cars, right? And there will be Pontiac brothers out there who develop a Pontiac AI and a Ford AI, and someone's going to make a better assembly line to assemble it. And so Cadillac won't be the only brand of AI out there. And it may be just as, during the 70s and the gas crisis, the rest of the world looked at those big boats that Cadillac was producing, the 76 Eldorado convertible, one of my favorite cars of all time, and looked at them as just insane given the world of how it had flipped. We may see the same thing here. We may see the same thing here.
Very true.
All right, let's take a break. We're going to come back and let's go on to our next block, which is driving under the AI influence. I didn't realize it was a crime. You're watching Techstrong Yank.
You've earned it. The spotlight, the responsibility, the weight of teams, companies, and entire industries fall on your shoulders. Lives depend on your decisions, your home life included. At work, you're protected, physically and digitally. Nothing gets through your team without a fight. But in a globally connected world, everyone sees you, including those who mean to cause you and your organization harm. And now home, your sanctuary. Attackers see an opportunity. Your digital front door is wide open. And what compromises your home can breach your boardroom. Because the devil's greatest trick isn't targeting your workplace firewall. It's convincing you that your personal life isn't at risk. Black Cloak. Digital executive protection, defending the new attack surface. Your personal life.
Hey, folks, we're back and talking about a little bit more AI, but in a different context. The folks over at Tesla are talking about putting a new GPU inside the cars that's a little more powerful. And that got everybody talking about, well, just what are the safety concerns around these issues? And Stephen, I know you follow it more closely than I have been, but what is your take here? What's going on? Because we have been putting GPUs in these cars, but this next generation is a whole other thing. And well, I don't know. Do we really want to hallucinate while we're driving?
Certainly not. So I first off, you may not believe this in 5 minutes, but I am a Tesla owner and I think it's a pretty good car. Setting that aside, this is really, really dumb story. So let's dive in. So technically speaking, Tesla has hardware in it to do the self-driving features. And you should put self-driving in scare quotes because, of course, it's not really self-driving. It's driver assistance. And, and from the very first car, they've had now 4 generations of self-driving hardware in the cars. They call it AI 5 now. That's the new one that they've introduced. But before that, it was called Hardware 1, Hardware 2, etc. The current cars have Hardware 4, which came out in 2023. In that time, Tesla has ramped up the amount of processing power along with the sensors that are used to do any kind of driver assistance features. So, for example, the original ones relied on Intel's Mobileye platform, which used, I believe, Intel Atom CPU cores. Then they moved to an NVIDIA AI computer. Then they moved to a Tesla designed chip that uses ARM A72 cores, I believe. Now they've got a new platform, that uses ARM cores and is another Tesla design. And the new one they're claiming is going to be much, much more powerful. One of the things that they're saying is that it's going to have, I don't remember the number, like 40 times as much memory, which wouldn't be a big surprise, or 9 times more memory, because the current one only has 16 gigs of memory. And as I said, it's basically A72 cores with 16 gigs of memory. It takes 160 watts of power consumption. This is not a powerhouse chip. This is a decent, strong chip for automotive applications. The new one, they're saying, is going to be like an 800 watt chip with 144 gigs of memory and, all sorts of performance and everything. And the problem with that is, who cares? The hardware 4 actually does a pretty good job of doing driver assistance features, despite what some people might say, and despite the crazy man in charge of the company. It honestly is a pretty good car with pretty good features. The problem is that even at 160 watts of power consumption, it drains your battery. So if you leave the car locked in a airport parking garage for a while, you're going to go from 60% to 40% battery pretty quickly. And if it's wintertime, you might find yourself at 20% battery and the thing will automatically shut itself off. That's because, frankly, running a little computer, even a 160 watt computer, and that's maximum TDP. I doubt it uses quite that much, but that's going to take some power. So Elon, being Elon, is going to make some crazy statements here to justify what they're doing. And the crazy statements around the AI 5 platform, which again is just hardware 5, that's just the next generation chip that they're going to use in the Teslas, is that these things are going to be all sorts of useful. He's saying that these chips are going to be used outside of Tesla cars, that maybe they'll be used in robots or flying cars. I know that sounds crazy. It's crazy. Also, he suggested maybe they would use them in satellites, because Starlink, they're sending satellites up there. Now, we talked on the Tuesday episode about how crazy it is to try to dissipate heat in space and have an AI data center in space. Well, it's not any less crazy if it comes from Elon's mouth. So all of this is to say that the promises they're making are really not likely to happen. But the most crazy / stupid promise is one of the things that he announced, which is that these chips are so powerful that they will allow Tesla to use idle parked cars as an AI supercomputer, a distributed AI supercomputer. That makes no sense whatsoever. So let's think about it. So do you want your car to be sucking down 800 watts of power from your 100 kilowatt hour battery pack to do AI processing with a slow network connection? And 144 gigs is more memory, but not crazy amounts of memory and not a lot of storage. I mean, there's no practical world in which it makes sense to use Tesla, of 50, 60, 70 plus $1,000 cars as AI supercomputing nodes when you could do exactly the same thing at $1,000 a pop in a data center somewhere that has a stable supply of power and a stable network connection. This is just another promise, like Elon Musk saying in 2019 that Tesla buyers would have an appreciating asset because full self-driving would allow them to lease their car out as a robo-taxi when they're not using it. That was pretty crazy, but the idea of using the fleet of Tesla cars as an AI supercomputer, it makes no sense technically. It makes no sense financially. It makes no sense for owners. And this is the dumbest thing I've heard in at least 36 hours. And that's saying a lot for 2025.
So wait a minute. Let's say I did lease the GPU in my car back to them. What am I getting? Like, is this going to be like, 2 cents a minute, or how does that kind of pricing? What would I actually get for my trouble?
Well, see, that's the problem. Exactly. What would you get for your trouble? So even if these chips are 9 times faster than the fine but not really impressive hardware 4 chips that you've got in your car already, that's nothing compared to a modern, H100. I mean, you would need literally, I don't have the numbers here, but you would need, let's say, a whole bunch of cars to theoretically even the theoretically computational power of a single, NVIDIA device. And yet you'd also need bandwidth for data and storage. And none of that would make any kind of financial sense. The best possible scenario would be that you'd get pennies, but the truth is you'd get negative pennies, because the other thing that's happening here is you're wearing out your battery and you're wearing out your hardware. Already we've seen that, GPUs used for AI processing have an actual useful lifespan more like 18 months than the, 6-7 years that you might get out of a conventional computer. And that's because they're run hard and hot all the time. Well, do you want that to happen to your car? Do you want your car's computer to have an 18-month lifespan? Do you want your battery to have an 18-month lifespan? None of this makes sense. And there's no financial model that would make it make sense for owners.
Mhm. So I don't know, Grima, is it me or does it feel like sometimes a lot Elon's just making these grandiose statements and then maybe some engineers will attempt to execute it, but by the time, it's supposed to come to fruition, nobody remembers what he said 5 years ago and nobody calls him on it.
So I think there is, pros and cons of everything. And again, with Elon, I there are some things which I think it's also good because, of course, Steve, you are killing the story here. But I want to give some credit to the disruptions in the market he has done so far. I mean, Starlink, for example, is a great initiative of a non-terrestrial kind of network which we can create for countries like Canada. You know, there is also like substantial amount of change which he brought in through like the work which he's doing with the Tesla software, for example, particularly the user plane control plane ecosystem. I would agree to what Steve has been saying, is that thermal efficiency and energy efficiency is the one which we all watch out for, because I live in Canada, I live in a colder climate, so I would like to have a car which is also reliable in that climatic ecosystem. The edge cases which we have, like the urban complexity, for example, or the climate complexity which we face in Canada, and if you go to Asian demography, it is even more complex, because roads are subject to any kind of disruption, right? So those are the kind of things which I would like to see, if from a user plane control plane perspective, we can make more enhancements through these kind of efficient chips, which is this I think it's AI 5, which is the newest one. Maybe that's something which I would watch out for, and I'm positively looking forward for the software updates in this. Now, he has been claiming also that this will be used by Optimus, which is this robotic arm, and he will integrate AI with cars and robots. I think it will have some impact on some kind of a business model generated out of it, but we probably will have to take Steve's word here and see and be carefully watching out for this change.
Hmm. Stephen, are you also saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the reasons I stay away from electric cars is, I feel like you drive for 2 hours and you charge for 2 hours, and now maybe we're gonna drive for half an hour and charge for 3 hours. I don't know.
Well, let's just say that that's not an accurate impression of electric cars. I'll start by that. As someone who owns only electric cars, one Tesla and one BMW electric car, I'll say that they're great, and you don't drive for 2 hours and charge for 2 hours. So we'll start with that. But in Elon's crazy world, where you're sucking down 800 watts of power continually and continually transferring potentially gigabytes or even terabytes of data over the cellular network in order to handle that AI processing, yeah, you're looking at a 50-mile range on your brand new Model S. Again, this is why this doesn't make sense. The last thing you want to do is attach, try to run things off of batteries. Remember SETI at home? And, I loved SETI at home. It was so cool. It was, you could do like, and then they did protein folding at home. And so when you weren't at your laptop or your desktop or whatever, it would do, computations, distributed calculations and computations. And it was super fun. It was not financially viable for you, the user. It was gratifying. You were contributing to science, contributing something that you cared about. That's the only scenario I can see where something like this would make even a lick of sense.
So, Stephen, both SETI and the protein folding was about utilizing unused capacity or underutilized capacity to tackle these real world problems. The fact of the matter, that was also the model behind Uber, right? Most people who owned a car didn't use it all the time. For most of the day, it sat idle. And if we could put those cars into use, people could actually do make money from the better utilization of their vehicle.
Yep. And remember, Elon promised that in 2019. He said, and I quote, Teslas will no longer be a depreciating asset. They will be an appreciating asset because you'll be able to use them as part of the robotaxi fleet using full self-driving. I'm sorry, that will not happen. To, Garima's point, no one who knows anything about this stuff will say that there's a car that can drive 100% autonomous in 100% of conditions at 100% of locations. It just isn't possible. And so Elon's promise then was nonsense, and this suggestion now is just complete nonsense as well.
I'll also add one more thing to this to substantiate what Steve is saying, that the business models are weaker, not only in this case, but also if you see non terrestrial network or satellite network. This is like adding cost to the business, adding cost to the user. I think it makes sense for some particular use cases, right? And it's the same thing with self driving cars and, inference engines and the cars from control plane, user plane, management plane level. But when it comes to, let's say, non-terrestrial network, it also has a high cost to the business, and it's not non-substantiated how this would play around in the longer run.
If I may agree, but first of all, I have to say, you said no one remembers what Elon said 5 years ago. Stephen does.
I remember.
Obviously, yes.
Yeah, but and you may remember I've said in the past, I have a physics background. Whenever you use a lot of energy, often it manifests itself as heat. We don't know the conditions the cars are going to be in or the environmental conditions the cars are going to be in when they're utilized this way. And we have, if you haven't seen yet, a car fire for an electric car is horrendous. It's very destructive and hard to put out. And we haven't even talked about what the extra high level utilization it's going to create with this new heat output, especially if a car is in an enclosed garage with no ventilation. I mean, there's a lot of environmental issues that you cannot control when you do this autonomous. Let's just suck up some computing power.
Yet none of it makes sense, does it?
Mm. And by the way, most of the Uber drivers that I know are not using their family vehicles to drive around town. They have actually become professionals and they have a car specifically for that purpose because the family car would just can't take that kind of wear and tear.
How many Uber drivers do you know, Mike?
Oh, well, I seem to count the same guys seem to drive around my town. So it's about 10 of them, and it's usually one of those 10 guys.
But look, everything y'all said is, you like the way I used y'all, you got to love it when Alan Schimmel throws a y'all out there. Everything y'all said is absolutely true, but I'll say this. Our children will not, or grandchildren, as the case may be, will not know a time when people drove cars. I firmly believe that.
I agree. This may not be the path.
They will live in a time where somebody else is driving their car.
I do think we will lick this problem. It may not be Elon who solves it, and it won't be the Tesla Gen 5 or whatever he calls it. But I do firmly believe we are destined for a future of autonomous vehicles, both trucks, cars, vans, trains, planes, and automobiles.
Alan, I agree. It's going to take infrastructure to get there, not cars only.
Where's that damn flying car you promised me 10 years ago, too? Wow, right?
Go we get Astro on it. Anyway, hey, let's take a break. We're going to come back here and get on our C block. We'll get back to something a little more mundane, like ransomware. You're watching Techstrong, gang.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
Hey folks, we're back. And to Alan's point, we're talking about an article up on Security Boulevard that says that there's been an uptick in ransomware incidents. And this comes after several months of maybe the industry collectively patting itself on the back, saying we've been driving these number of ransomware incidents down. But Jeff, it seems like, every time we think we whack this mole, the tactics and techniques change and we're back to square one. Is that what's going on?
I think it's exactly what's going on, Mike. I think you have a good grasp of the situation. Terry wrote a couple of good articles on this on Techstrong. And the challenge that we have is we're trying to solve ransomware with technology. And first of all, the weak point for ransomware has always been people. Always. It always takes someone clicking something for ransomware to work. It rarely happens completely unattended. I know there are cases, but that's rare. So if you take a look at what have we upgraded in the humans, it's nothing. Yeah, we've made them aware. We put out PSAs. We have conferences saying, by the way, here's what you should do. Never click a link. But people still do it. It's human nature. And that's something we haven't changed. I'm not sure we're going to necessarily. Add that to the fact that ransomware is a very profitable business when you're successful at it for two reasons. One, you can get a lot of money without having any physical harm risk to yourself. I'm not encouraging people to be ransomware experts, by the way. That's the first one. And the second one is that you're always going to find someone that can do it. And now, because of those two conditions, the business of I can sell you any parts of ransomware toolkits that you need at a relatively low cost on the dark web, it's not difficult, especially if it's state sponsored, but it's not difficult for really anyone to be able to say, I want to go buy a list of IP addresses. I want to buy a list of email addresses to target. I want to buy a list of, or I want to buy an engine that can run when people do click so that I can get all of their cryptocurrency. It's not hard to do that. I will offer, as Terry Robinson said, ransomware never really went away. I think two things have occurred that make us think we've done better. One, other things have come to the front. So there's a little less reporting of ransomware. That may be hard to believe, but I've seen instances where it's true, where I've talked to organizations that said, we had it, we dealt with it, it's over. Okay. We'll see if it's over. So that's one. That other thing to overtaking it. And the lower reporting, I think, contributes, but the main is that there are dark web-based businesses that offer these tools that the bad guys are gonna buy at a relatively low cost, and they can shotgun it. If they hit 100,000 targets, if they go for 100,000 targets and 3 hit, they win. So, I really think that's where we are.
So you're saying that, there are people who are getting mugged out there, and because there's not going to be any recourse, they don't bother reporting it to the police? Gee, that never happens.
Nope, never. Even when there is recourse, they don't necessarily, for a whole bunch of reasons. They don't want the attention.
Especially if you're an immigrant today in America or something like that. But, this whole thing here, and Terry did do a nice job on these. This reminds me a little bit of the MIT versus Wharton dueling reports on the success of AI, right? How can they both be right, but yet they are? It's kind of quantum. I think with ransomware, we're seeing a similar thing. I think the amount of ransomware attacks continues to tick up, continues at a good steady clip, if not increasing. I think where we're seeing a decrease is the effectiveness of these ransomware attacks. I think, and it was a report we did here just a couple of days ago where we saw the amount of ransomware attacks that resulted in a payment of ransom went from 28% to 23%, which is a sizable decrease, right? And why aren't people paying? Couple things. Number one, I think companies are wise now that they've got to have an impeccable backup solution that if they do get ransomed, they can restore without having to pay the ransom money. So it kind of renders them a little bit immune. Secondly, advent of cyber insurance and other ransomware professional negotiators, if you will, have really had a huge impact on how much we pay, when we pay, who do we pay it to, right? We've seen the government in years past come out and say it's illegal to pay the ransom. Don't pay the ransom. It's negotiating with terrorists, right? Then we saw it go the other way. Well, maybe you should pay the ransom sometimes. But we've developed sort of a professional cadre now of our level of people who specialize, and they'll say, okay, what kind of ransom malware are we talking about? Who's the gang behind it? Are they honorable thieves? And stuff like this. And so we have gotten better at dealing with ransomware. And and we have gotten better at spotting phishing and stuff like that. But what we also have to remember is, what are the vectors of where ransomware gets in? It's still predominantly a phishing attack. And when we talk about phishing attack, a good friend, it'll rear its ugly head here again, AI has had a huge effect on the quality of phishing, spear phishing, and just general cast-wide net phishing that we get in our email boxes today. We've all seen it, right? You got to really look at these emails now.
I think though, when I talk to people, they can recover their data, but it's not instantaneous by any shot. So basically, they now do the math and says it's going to take us 2 days, maybe 3 days to get this back to going again. And then the CFO looks at it and says, well, 3 days worth of revenue is still lower than the ransom, so we're paying the ransom. So, Stephen, I don't know what you're seeing, but
Yeah, I definitely am hearing. I'm not seeing it because I don't have direct involvement with people paying ransom to ransomware attacks, but I'm definitely hearing about people paying the ransom, and I'm hearing incredibly about ransomware gangs actually living up to their side of that bargain and unencrypting data, which is just absolutely nuts. The other thing that's happening too is that there's a lot of not just ransomware, but for encryption, but ransomware for release. Data release. Essentially, I will release
Right.
this data.
Extortion, blackmail, right? Yeah.
But one thing that I'm definitely seeing, as you mentioned, is that the sophistication of these systems has gone way up. So we talk in the article here about as a service. You can literally just say, "Hey, I wish I could be a ransomware guy or gal." And guess what? You too can do ransomware. All you have to do is sign up for one of these services, and you can ransomware all you like, which is wild. The other thing, as you mentioned, is AI. I'm the recipient as a president of a company. I'm the recipient of a lot of ransom or a lot of phishing email, and I've gotten pretty good at it. But it's getting so much better and so much more clever. It used to be that you could just spot them instantly, to the extent that I was like, why doesn't Google just delete this garbage? It's obvious that I'm not, Nigerian prince doesn't have a bunch of money for me. But nowadays, I'm getting a lot more carefully targeted things, things that are supposed to emulate the voice of other people in the company. In fact, the funny thing is, I actually get some email for other addresses within my own company. And often that email comes from me. And it is, in fact, somebody emulating my voice in talking to HR or IT and saying, hey, this is Stephen. I want you to do this or that, which is hilarious because it comes to me. But the point is, that's the sort of thing that we're facing now when it comes to phishing. We're facing very clever things. The other day, no kidding, I got a voicemail in my own voice asking me to change payment for a client. That's wild. And that's the sort of, to Jeff's point, the people are always the door that these things go through, whether it's ransomware or extortion or phishing or whatever it is. But it's hard to be one of them people when you're getting this kind of attack.
mhm. That means if you don't know who it is, don't answer the message, right?
But you may, but to Steven's point, it's his voice. How do how do you not know who it?
Yeah, I mean, I almost bought myself some Best Buy gift cards, to be honest.
And I feel compelled to make one other point. It's not just phishing. It's how this ransomware is getting into the systems. We are seeing an uptick of, let's call it, direct malware injection, whether in AI poisoning, garden variety, OWASP top 10 type of stuff. It's not, phishing is still the predominant ingress point, but there are others. And it, just goes to the point where security, it's real. We got to be vigilant.
Alan, I'm glad you brought that up because it's not just phishing. There are new AI and there's more scale now, but I am, whether it's proud or not, to say that I was involved in what I think was the first public ransomware. Um, it was in 2003. I worked at a hosting company. I had just started, and on day 2, I noticed what was going on, and we worked for 5 months to extricate ourselves from it, which we did successfully, but it boiled down to we were hosting 1,000,000 websites, and over half of them were taken over. And it was very simple. We got a call from an Eastern European entity saying, "Hey, we're a security consulting company. We see you have a lot of problems. If you pay us a monthly fee, I'm sure we could take care of them." Oh, really? Um, and that was in 2003. So when you get down to it, in my opinion, it doesn't feel very different. It's just scale and speed now.
Absolutely. But no, there is a difference because back then they wouldn't stand up and say, "We've ransomed you and we're going to send you you need an ear of the victim to know we really got him or not." Right? Back then they posed as a security company that was going to help cure you. Now they don't have any, gumption about. They're saying, "Hey, we're bad guys. Pay us the money or you're done." Right? It's
Yeah. How is that any different than it would be a shame if anything bad happened to your nice
right.
restaurant,
That's right.
right?
If you elect this guy mayor, we may not be able to send you any federal money.
Yeah, there's
So
something about that too. Hey,
yeah,
Garima, I just want to ask one question about this. I got to say about this whole as a service thing, these people seem to really have adopted some really awesome best DevOps practices for building out this software. So, you got to hand it to them. They read the manual.
Exactly. So, and I was also reading about this a couple of days back, like Warm GPT as a service. And when these kind of softwares hit the market, you have to be very careful. They're not targeting enterprise customers. They are targeting people. And this is like a small ransomware or small things which you do in the ecosystem, and it is like spreading the ransomware at scale, right? So this is like a democratization of ransomware through a software as a service model. And this is a shift which is happening to the point what Alan mentioned, that enterprises are more cautious. They have these legal advocates and they have insurers, but like the common people, these 8 billion people, we don't have insurers for these kind of malicious activities. So I think we need to be careful here, and we need to educate as we go along the people in the ecosystem not to fall trap of this.
I couldn't agree with that more. And I have to say one thing on this cybercrime as a service. If you take a look, and there is some research on this from the dark web, not only do they get DevOps, not only do they get presentation, they get customer service. These guys get rated, and they want their ratings to be high so they get more customers. So if you have any issues, they'll support you or give you a refund. No questions asked. They're kind of like the Costco of the cyber world. And they get it. And on the normal side of the web, that really doesn't happen very much. But in the dark web, boy, they own it. They're gonna make you happy and want you to come back.
Yesterday, actually, to close this point off, I was discussing this with John Willis. The same point, like, these malicious software as a service. Think about your teens, teenagers in your home. They can easily fall trap of these kind of things because, if you don't educate your kids and the ecosystem around you, it's that kind of audience they have, or that kind of customers they have.
absolutely. Hey guys, we're over time though. I'm afraid I got to end this one. Um, Garima, Jeff, Steve, and Mike, thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us here on Techstrong Gang. We hope you've enjoyed it. I believe don't we have a field day on today, don't we?
We do actually. We if you watch basically right after this, we're going to be going live with Networking Field Day, day 2. We're going to be hearing from a big company you may have heard of called Cisco today.
Excellent. So stay tuned for that on your favorite Techstrong TV network here, whether you're watching it on LinkedIn or Facebook or X or YouTube, or if you're not watching the stream, you can still check out Tech Field Day on their Tech Field Day YouTube channel or on the Techstrong OTT app, which is on Android and iOS and Amazon and Apple TV and Roku and all that good stuff. But in any event, we will be back tomorrow for our Friday show, TGIF. And we'll have more good stuff then. But until then, this is Alan Schimmel. We're out.